not a survey of the history of the Baha'i Faith. We picked out certain particular aspects which may be of relevance as we think about how to prepare for those conversations, how to begin practicing those conversations that we should be having around the bicentennial of the birth of the Blessed Beauty. The story of the Baha'u'llah's proclamation is really quite extraordinary in terms of history, but also even within the Baha'i context. And I must confess, when I started researching and preparing this, that I had a good deal of difficulty getting my head around the phenomenon, simply because Baha'u'llah wrote so many documents, and their contents is so creative in the way he's organized this material. And as I was doing it, just to help myself understand it, I prepared a sort of a table chronologically with the different writings and who they were addressed to and something about the content. And I decided that although this is a very preliminary sort of a work in progress, that it was worth sharing. So there's a stack of them over there on a music stand which you can take on your way out. Please don't go and get them now and read them while we're talking, but they are offered as a humble contribution and kind of a byproduct of my own efforts to prepare this talk. Now, the idea of writing to kings and rulers, of course, was not entirely novel. Muhammad sent emissaries to announce his mission. He didn't write letters because he didn't write, but he sent messengers to the Shah of Persia, who was Khosrow II at that time, the ruler of Ethiopia, the emperor of Byzantium, the ruler of Egypt, and the governor of Damascus, and the imam of Yamama. So this notion of addressing rulers is at least, that goes back at least to Muhammad. And it's interesting that the Shah of Persia was already addressed at that period. The Bab also addressed the kings collectively in the Qayyamul Asma and sent specific tablets to Muhammad Shah of Persia and Sultan Abdul Majid of Turkey. So here we have already the Shah of Persia and the Sultan of Turkey, and Baha'u'llah will be speaking to them, writing to them again, as you know. Baha'u'llah said that, however, based on this precedent, and you will see that his addresses to these rulers went far further and much deeper. And he himself said, "Never since the beginning of the world hath the message been so openly proclaimed." In fact, this was one of Baha'u'llah's primary focuses of attention or priorities for a period of 10 years. The first message to the ruler was in 1863, while he was in Istanbul, and he wrote to the Sultan of Turkey at that time. Unfortunately, to the best of my knowledge, that the text of that message has not been found, but it is at least established because Baha'u'llah himself mentioned it in other writings that he wrote. And this was, part of it was a protest against the edict of further banishment to Edirne, Adrianople, and part of it was an indictment of the Sultan's rule. Now, in these, this process then went on from Edirne, Adrianople. He wrote the Surah Muluk and the first tablet to Napoleon. On the way from, and also his long letter to Nasruddin Shah, Lahi Sultan, was also in 1868 from Edirne. Then on the way from Edirne to Gallipoli, he wrote the Suri Rais, which is a message to the Grand Vizier of the Ottoman Empire. And he wrote to him again upon arrival in Akka. There's another message to the foreign minister of the Turkish Empire, Lahi Fuad, from the Akka citadel. Then we have the second tablet to Napoleon, the tablet to the Pope, the tablet to Tsar Alexander II, and the tablet to Queen Victoria, all of which were written from the Akka citadel around 1869. Then, very interestingly, Baha'u'llah chose to prepare a new edition, if you will, of the Suri Heikhal, which he'd written in Edirne in 1868, but including in the text the messages to the Pope, to Napoleon III, to Tsar Alexander, Queen Victoria, and Nasruddin Shah, and then he added sort of a concluding paragraph to that, and had this prepared and distributed. He had it written actually in the form of a pentacle, and clearly it was for general distribution at that time as a complete work. And then, of course, as most of you know, in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, revealed in 1873 in the house of Udi Khamar, he addressed the kings of the earth, the rulers of America, and the presidents of the republics therein, Kaiser William I of Germany, and Franz Joseph, Emperor of Austria and Hungary, and the leaders of religion. Now, even then, it doesn't stop, because many of the tablets revealed after the Aqdas also include messages or appeals to the world leaders. But I think still the main phenomenon really is bookended in this 10-year period from 1863 to 1873. But just from the recitation of the number of these, and I don't know how many, we were talking about word counts, I don't know what this represents, and of course these writings also include appeals to the believers. They include such things as the prayers of fasting, and some things about the Baha'i calendars, and the calendar and the twin birthdays and so on. Baha'u'llah's style involved moving from different things and combining different themes together. But the dominant themes of these works were the appeal or the messages, the proclamation to the kings, the secular rulers, and the religious potentates, but also to the followers of all religions, to the parliamentarians of the world, and so on. And it's an extraordinary piece of work. Obviously I can't summarize all of the contents of these works, but I think that we chose as the title, Speaking Truth to Power, because that's a concept that our societies are interested in. And certainly some of the part of the text here can certainly be characterized as a very bold address from a prisoner who was completely within the control of and subject to the rule of some of these potentates, but who fearlessly challenged them and brought them to account. Now to the Pope, who at that point was still a secular ruler as well as a religious ruler at the head of the Papal States. It didn't last very long after he received the message, but when Baha'u'llah wrote to him, he was a very powerful king as well as the head of an enormous ecclesiastical organization. And Baha'u'llah said, "O Supreme Pontiff, incline thine ear to that which the fashioner of mouldering bones counselleth thee, as voiced by him who is his most great name. Sell all the embellished ornaments that us possess, and expend them in the path of God, who causeth the night to return upon the day, and the day to return upon the night. Abandon thy kingdom to the kings, and emerge from thy habitation with thy face set toward the kingdom with a capital K, and detached from the world. Then speak forth the praises of thy Lord between heaven and earth. Now, I don't see anybody writing to the current Pope and suggesting that he might sell all the ornaments. And the current Pope is a much more benign character than Pope Pius IX. So this is an example. Another one is, and you're familiar with this, but returning to the writing to the kings collectively in the tablet to Queen Victoria, actually. O kings of the earth, we see you increasing every year your expenditures and laying the burden thereof on your subjects. This verily is wholly and grossly unjust. Fear the sighs and tears of this wronged one, and lay not excessive burdens on your peoples. Do not rob them to rear palaces for yourselves. Nay, rather, choose for them that which ye choose for yourselves. Now, we talk about the extremes of wealth and poverty today. We talk about the distribution of income and about corruption in high places. Baha'u'llah, I think, is unsparing in his statements on that regard. He also, in the Surah Muluk, says to the rulers, know ye that the poor are the trust of God in your midst. Watch that ye betray not his trust, that ye deal not unjustly with them, and that ye walk not in the ways of the treacherous. So again, not mincing his words. In another place, in the same tablet, he says, if ye stay not the hand of the oppressor, if ye fail to safeguard the rights of the downtrodden, what right have ye then to vaunt yourselves among men? What is it of which ye can rightly boast? Is it on your food and your drink that ye pride yourselves? On the riches ye lay up in your treasuries? On the diversity and the cost of the ornaments with which ye deck yourselves? This is a very challenging message. In another place in that same tablet, if ye pay no heed unto the counsels which in peerless and unequivocal language we have revealed in this tablet, divine chastisement shall assail you from every direction, and the sentence of his justice shall be pronounced against you. On that day you shall have no power to resist him, and shall recognize your own impotence. I'm just choosing a few gems here. This is also from the same message, and he's addressing this part to the kings of Christendom. And he starts by saying, have ye not heard the saying of Jesus, the Spirit of God, I go away and come again unto you? And then, why did you fail to recognize him? And yet, behold how, when he did bring the truth, ye refused to turn your faces toward him, and persisted in disporting yourselves with your pastimes and fancies. Ye have, by reason of your failure, hindered the breath of God from being wafted over you, and have withheld from your souls the sweetness of its fragrance. Ye continue roving with delight in the valley of your corrupt desires. By God, ye and all that ye possess shall pass away. So, in terms of speaking truth to power, we have an extraordinary example, and one which is still relevant, although as I'll mention shortly, many of the kings and rulers to whom he wrote, and many of their dynasties have since disappeared, but we now have similar issues, I think, in many countries with the elected leadership. At the same time, Baha'u'llah is proclaiming in the same messages, very clear terms, the essence of his mission, the positive side of his teachings, and making it very clear what actually what was expected. So it's in the tablet to Queen Victoria that we find this extraordinary series of statements about the world and what it needs. I won't read them because you're familiar with it, but he starts with regard the world as a human body, which, though it is creation whole and perfect, hath been afflicted through various causes with grave disorders and maladies. Not for one day did it gain ease, nay, its sickness waxed more severe, as it fell under the treatment of ignorant physicians. Then he said, we behold it in this day at the mercy of rulers so drunk with pride that they cannot discern clearly their own best advantage, much less recognize a revelation so bewildering and challenging as this. That which the Lord hath ordained as the sovereign remedy and mightiest instrument for the healing of all the world is the union of all its peoples in one universal cause, one common faith. And it goes on to say, now that you've refused the most great peace, hold ye fast to this, the lesser peace, that haply you may in some degree better your own conditions and that of your dependents. And he's also in here talking about the need for disarmament, or at least stopping arms races. He talks about Be united, O kings of the earth, for thereby will the tempest of discord be stilled among you, and your peoples find rest. Should any one among you take up arms against another, rise ye all against him. So the principle of collective security. All of these things are laid out in these tablets. Now, have also the appeals to not only to religious leaders but to followers of religions. O ye peoples of all faiths, walk not in the ways of them that followed the Pharisees and thus veiled themselves from the Spirit, meaning Jesus. They truly have strayed and are in error. The ancient beauty is come in his most great name, and he wisheth to admit all mankind to the most holy kingdom. And again, O followers of the Son, these are from the tablet to the Pope. We have once again sent John unto you, and he verily hath cried out in the wilderness of the Bayan. So he's referring to the way in which the Bab is the return of St. John the Baptist. O peoples of the world, cleanse your eyes. The day whereon you can behold the promised one and attain unto him hath drawn nigh. And then say, O concourse of Christians, we have on a previous occasion revealed ourselves to you, and ye recognized me not. Yet this is yet another occasion vouchsafed unto you. This is the day of God. Turn ye unto him. Now, I don't need to go into detail, but there were some remarkable things that happened immediately or within a very short period after the revelation of these writings and tablets. It's in the Akdas that Baha'u'llah refers to the banks of the Rhine, foreshadowing the defeat of Germany in 2 successive wars. But some things even more rapidly. Napoleon, within about a year after receiving the second tablet, was defeated in the Battle of Sudan. His empire fell apart. He was sent into exile. The Turkish ruler, Baha'u'llah wrote in 1869, talking about the imminent downfall of Ali Pasha and the overthrow of the Sultan. Ali Pasha was dismissed and died in disgrace. Only 2 years later, the Sultan was overthrown 5 years after that. So in quite rapid succession, some of these very same rulers fell, lost their thrones, and in many cases their lives. I won't go into all the detail, but the table that you can see there, you can follow some of these events. So, but in summing up this period, and these messages and their consequences, Baha'u'llah wrote some very interesting things. Among others, he wrote that from two ranks of men power hath been seized, kings and ecclesiastics. He wrote, and it's in Gleanings, that in a passage in Gleanings in which it is God addressing Baha'u'llah, he says, "Warn and acquaint the people, O servant, with the things we have sent down unto thee. Let the fear of no one dismay thee, and be thou not of them that waver." And then a little further on, he says, "We have pledged ourselves to secure thy triumph upon earth, and to exalt our cause above all men, though no king be found who would turn his face toward thee." In another place, Baha'u'llah writes, "The kings have recognized that it was not in their interest to acknowledge me, and have likewise, as have likewise the ministers and the divines, notwithstanding that my purpose hath been most explicitly revealed in the divine books and tablets, and the true one hath loudly proclaimed that this most great revelation hath appeared for the betterment of the world and the exaltation of the nations." And in fact, even within the tablet to Queen Victoria, there's a very interesting transition where, towards the end of the tablet, Baha'u'llah is well, I think again it's the voice of God speaking to Baha'u'llah, but he says, "Rein in thy pen, O pen of the Ancient of Days, and leave them to themselves, for they are immersed in their idle fancies." He's referring to the kings. Then he says, "Make thou mention of the Queen, that she may turn with a pure heart unto the scene of transcendent glory, may withhold not her eyes from gazing toward her Lord, the Supreme Ordainer, and may become acquainted with that which hath been revealed in the books and tablets by the Creator of all mankind. He through whom the sun hath been darkened and the moon eclipsed, through whom this call hath been raised betwixt earth and heaven." Now this is, of course, as you know, the letter in which Baha'u'llah commends the Queen Victoria for forbidding the slave trade, or stopping the slave trade, not slavery, but the slave trade at least, and also for giving power to the Parliament. But clearly, in the message, he also expected more of her, and quite unusually, he concludes the tablet by revealing a prayer for her to say. Now, this may become of relevance in your country as we approach the bicentennial, but in this prayer, he recommends to Queen Victoria to pray in these terms: "O my sovereign Lord, I am but a vassal of thine, and thou art in truth the King of kings. I have lifted my suppliant hands under the heaven of thy grace and thy bounties. Send down then upon me from the clouds of thy generosity that which will rid me of all else save thee, and draw me nigh unto thyself. I doubt very much that Queen Victoria used this prayer, but it's an interesting indication of what actually was expected of the kings and rulers, and in the sense that she was perhaps one of the few where he found something where he could commend and encourage, the fact that he went on further to offer her this personal spiritual guidance is an indication that with all of the majesty and the power and the prophecies and the warnings, that the message was also one of love, even to these rather rascally tyrants who were ruling the world at that time. So we're going to continue giving you different voices and different aspects of the subject.
I'm really thinking as I'm listening, we didn't have time to hear what each other was going to say. Each one was busy working on their own. But I'm finding it quite wonderful. I feel very honored to be in the UK. When I realize, and I'm thinking about Queen Victoria, I'm thinking about the Baha'i history of this country. I'm seeing so many friends who've been pioneering all over the world, and really it's an honor to be here. Makes me think and reflect. Plus, we have ancestors from your country. And that's also very interesting for us to be able to think that this is sort of from where our own ancestors came, and there's a connection there, and we're all doing the best we can all around the world now at this very important time of history. Following this review that Link has given about Baha'u'llah's proclamation to the world's secular and religious leaders, I would like to review together one story about the Bab in Isfahan in 1846, and another about Baha'u'llah in Akka in 1889. In both of these, the manifestations of God themselves foretell how their revelations will be spread and propagated. Each explains that it will not be through those same secular and religious leaders of whom we have just been speaking. To the contrary, this great privilege is reserved for another population entirely: the poor and lowly of this land, Iran, and the meek and lowly ones of the earth. I would also like to share some personal thoughts about how today it's our privilege to see some of the results of the sacrifices, devotion, and steadfastness of some of these meek and lowly in different parts of the world, as our faith begins to penetrate the soil of society, is witness to changes in culture, and reacts to the initial steps of community building. That's how I would like to work with my 25 minutes. So the first story is, of course, about Manucher Khan. I apologize in advance for all my pronunciation of the names. In the summer of 1846, 171 years ago, the Bab bade farewell to Shiraz and proceeded to Isfahan. As he approached the outskirts of the city, he wrote a letter to the governor of Isfahan, Manucher Khan, to inquire where should he stay. Sayyid Kazim, who accompanied him on this journey, delivered his letter to the governor. The letter was written with such courtesy and in such exquisite penmanship. Manucher Khan instructed the Imam of Isfahan, the foremost ecclesiastical authority of the province, to receive the Bab in his own home. And the Imam then requested his own brother to go outside of the town to meet and escort the visitor to the gate of the city. As the Bab approached, the Imam Jumayd went out to welcome him in person and conducted him ceremoniously to his house. Many honors were accorded the Bab at that time in Isfahan, and many were the proofs he offered, even miracles he performed in response to requests received during those days from various individuals. To name just a few of these honors and proofs, the people of the city gradually became enamored of him, and an unceasing stream of visitors flowed from every quarter to the house of the Imam Jumayd. The inhabitants would clamor after his bath water. They believed it had a special power to heal their sicknesses and ailments. He revealed, at the request of the Imam, a written commentary on the Surah of Val Asr from the Quran 103. With astonishing rapidity and without the least premeditation. Those present were bewitched, and he also chanted for them. One of the mullahs remarked, "Peerless and unique as are the words which have streamed from this pen, to be able to reveal within so short a time, and in so legible a writing, so great a number of verses as to equal a fourth, nay, a third of the Quran, is in itself an achievement such as no mortal, without the intervention of God, could hope to perform." This quotation from the Dawnbreakers. And again, in response to Manucher Khan's personal request, he demonstrated the validity of another passage, Nubuvat Ikhasi, and in less than 2 hours he wrote out 50 pages of explanation with the most refreshing and circumstantial inquiry into the origin, the character, and the pervasive influence of Islam. Manucher Khan himself then commented, "Members of this revered assembly, I take you as my witnesses. I solemnly testify to my belief in the reality of the superhuman power with which this youth is endowed, a power which no amount of learning can ever impart." He also elucidated various points of abstruse philosophical documents at the request of different individuals. And then you probably remember this story, that at a banquet, a request was made of him that a childless couple might receive a blessing in order to have a child. He took a portion of the food he had been served, handed it to his host on a platter, and asked him to take it to the man and his wife. "Let them both partake of this. Their wish will be fulfilled." The wife conceived and gave birth to a daughter, and this same daughter was later married to the most great branch. That is, the child born of that miracle was Munir Khanum, who later married Abdul Baha. This was an idea of what happened during those days when he was in Isfahan. The enemies were watching closely, however. The clergy was becoming jealous. The growing popularity of the Bab aroused the resentment of the ecclesiastical authorities. They firmly believed that unless they rose to stem the tide of a popular enthusiasm, the very foundations of their existence would be undermined. They eventually issued a written document, signed and sealed by all the ecclesiastical leaders of the city, condemning the Bab to death. At one point, in order to protect him, the governor, Manushir Khan, had soldiers march the Bab out of the city as if he were being taken to Tehran, but had him secretly marched back into Isfahan so that he could personally protect the Bab as his own secret guest. During that time in his home, the governor was able to serve him his meals and wait on him personally. We read about this period when he was in his home, and this is the particular statement that's so important. One day, while seated with the Bab in his private garden within the courtyard of his house, the Mutmamid, this is another name for Manushir Khan, taking his guest into his confidence, addressed him in these words: "The Almighty Giver has endowed me with great riches. I know not how best to use them. Now that I have, by the aid of God, been led to recognize this revelation, it is my ardent desire to consecrate all my possessions to the furtherance of the interests and the spread of its fame." And then he proceeds to outline to the Bab his plan. "It is my intention to proceed by your leave to Tehran and to do my best to win to this cause Muhammad Shah, whose confidence in me is firm and unshaken. I'm certain that he will eagerly embrace it and will arise to promote it far and wide. I will also endeavor to induce the Shah to dismiss the profligate Haji Mirza Akazi, the folly of whose administration has well nigh brought this land to the verge of ruin. Next, I will strive to obtain for you the hand of one of the sisters of the Shah, and will myself undertake the preparation of your nuptials. Finally, I hope to be enabled to incline the hearts of the rulers and kings of the earth to this most wondrous cause, and to extirpate every lingering trace of that corrupt ecclesiastical hierarchy that has stained the fair name of Islam." And here is the response of the Bab. "May God requite you for your noble intentions," the Bab replied. "So lofty a purpose is to me even more precious than the act itself. Your days and mine are numbered, however. They are too short to enable me to witness and allow you to achieve the realization of your hopes. Not by the means which you fondly imagine will an almighty providence accomplish the triumph of his faith. Through the poor and lowly of this land, by the blood which these shall have shed in his path, will the omnipotent sovereign ensure the preservation and consolidate the foundation of his cause. That same God will, in the world to come, place upon your head the crown of immortal glory and will shower upon you his inestimable blessings. Of the span of your earthly life, there remain only 3 months and 9 days, after which you shall, with faith and certitude, hasten to your eternal abode." The Mut'amid greatly rejoiced at these words. Resigned to the will of God, he prepared himself for the departure which the words of the Bab had so clearly foreshadowed. He wrote his testament, settled his private affairs, and bequeathed whatever he possessed to the Bab. Immediately after his death, however, his nephew, the rapacious Gorgan Khan, discovered and destroyed his will, seized his property, and contemptuously ignored his wishes. So we thus have the picture of Manushir Khan's personal plan and the Bab's personal and prophetic response to it. I'm now going to go to a story similar in nature, but it is about Baha'u'llah. So I'm going to be quoting from the Revelation of Baha'u'llah, Volume 3. when there was a gentleman named, let's see, this name is hard for me, Haji Shah Khalilullah, more or less. The son of Muhammad Beg, that one I can do. And from a spoken chronicle to some friends. So this is from the Revelation of Baha'u'llah, Volume 3. And this gentleman is explaining what happened when he and his father were in the presence of Baha'u'llah, because we are now in Akka at a much later time. One day, Baha'u'llah informed my father that he would be visiting us in the afternoon. That day, he arrived with a few of his disciples. We were both highly honored by his presence and immersed in the ocean of his grace and bounties. After some time, he arose to depart. We accompanied him to the door, and as he went out, he signaled to us not to accompany him further. I watched from behind his graceful stature and the majesty of his walk until he disappeared from my sight. I was so carried away, and in that state I said to myself, what a pity. If only the kings of the world could recognize him and arise to serve him, both the cause and the believers would be exalted in this day. The following day, when we attained his presence, he turned his face to me and addressed the following words to me with infinite charm and loving kindness. He said, and of course this is a paraphrase of the words, if the kings and rulers of the world had embraced the faith in this day, you people could never have found an entry into this exalted court. You could never have had the opportunity to attain our presence, nor could you ever have acquired the privilege of hearing the words of the Lord of mankind. Of course, the time will come when the kings and rulers of the world will become believers, and the cause of God will be glorified outwardly. But this will happen after the meek and the lowly ones of the earth have won this inestimable bounty. So, in this next part of what I wish to say, I had some personal thoughts and comments, thinking, of course, about this extraordinary 10-year period in the life of Baha'u'llah, when he spent all that time writing to the kings and the rulers and giving so much guidance for the future of the governing of the world, and really quite extraordinary aspects of our future. And yet how it was not they who actually ended up, quite to the contrary, with the exception of Queen Victoria. And then when we read what the Bab and Baha'u'llah both said about how their faiths will progress and will be propagated, that there will come the time when the kings and the rulers, and we've seen a very few examples of that, but we do have a few. But in general, it seems it's the poor, the meek, and the lowly that are given the inestimable privilege of proceeding with this process. So it was so clear to me, and when I was reading this story of the Bab in Isfahan, his power was so great. It was overwhelming. It was so obvious to the inhabitants of the city. The magnitude of the signs of his divinity were extraordinary and clear, transparent. The proofs that he offered in response to requests received from various individuals were so willingly shared, so overwhelmingly convincing. Even those who had requested them, the ones who had requested those proofs, even gave testimony themselves to their power, as you heard. Many were the eyewitnesses of all of these events. Yet, what happened? How would the cause be spread? Even with the willing assistance of as high-ranking an individual as Manouchehr Khan, the Bab was clear it would not be through power, through influence, through high-ranking individuals. So we know the ensuing history of the spread of the faith in Iran at that time. The tremendous, irresistible attraction of the people of the country to the Bab, the 20,000 martyrdoms that followed. And similarly, with the story of Baha'u'llah, the same principle is reiterated when he says it will be the meek and lowly ones of the earth. Now, naturally, our faith spreads and grows at different rates in different parts of the world. It's not a linear process. Today, I think we're quite fortunate because we are far enough after the initial revelation that we can begin to see, at least to some degree, how this pattern of growth referred to by the Bab and Baha'u'llah is now continuing to play itself out, first in Iran and then throughout the world. We can testify in these days to the stunning progress being made by the Baha'is, particularly in what one might call the developing world. In today's terms, many see these countries as less fortunate, unfortunate, but it seems, at least to me, that they are in some ways leading us spiritually. I find it sort of a mystery, a special blessing from God to certain areas of the world. Tomorrow, my husband's going to show a PowerPoint about the spread of the faith from 1844 to 1994. And I suggest that we look quite carefully at some of the graphs and the things that he's put together as they show what an extraordinary pattern of growth emerged in the 70s and the 80s when the faith really began to take hold in the developing world. Speaking from personal experience, as I mentioned earlier, for 21 years, from 1972 to 1993, we were pioneering in 3 of these countries, right smack in the middle of Africa, French-speaking Africa. And this was, we were in CAR and Cameroon and the Ivory Coast. Maybe I said it already. Things were pretty basic. This is just to sort of give you an idea of how things had to start from nothing in some of these countries that are now quite excelling in what they're doing. We were pretty much starting from scratch, just electing a few local assemblies here and there. Our National Assembly had just been elected in the Central African Republic. We were trying to get the first children's classes going. I was trying very hard to work with the women and get to know the women, but they didn't speak French. They spoke the local language, which I didn't speak. So first we sort of worked through the gentlemen and then gradually persuaded them to bring their wives or the females so that we could start working with them. Principles of consultation, we had to work very hard because, of course, local assemblies and the National Assembly had to function according to what's in the writings, but this was really from the bottom up that we were trying to do this work. The laws, you had to go a little gently sometimes on the laws, but they had to be also explained. Only one wife, struggles with alcoholism, troubles with politics. I mean, phooey, the whole world went through this, right? When you go with the teachings of the faith and you need to gradually share them with wisdom and then hope and pray very hard that they will take hold and that some pure souls will arise to carry this faith on their own shoulders. The pioneers went to do a certain job, but it was only one stage of the thing, right? The beloved guardian always made it very clear that the point of going was so that the local believers would take hold of the faith and govern themselves and lead their countries. So we were in some of these places quite at the beginning of this process. And now you look and you can hardly believe it, but they had a lot of purity of heart, conviction of belief, tremendous commitment and devotion in spite of their rather wretched living circumstances. Every country we went to, we seemed to be living through a revolution, not a revelation, a revolution. And the first one was Bokassa, who some of you who are older, you may remember that name. So we lived through that revolution, and then we moved over to Cameroon, and then there was Ahidjo, and then he went, and then we moved over to the Ivory Coast, and there was Houphouët-Boigny, and then he went. And so everywhere we were going, there was this turmoil from many different points of view, not to mention the problems of health and of education and all of this. So you can try and get the picture of the environments in which this was transpiring, the beginnings of the movement of the faith. So years later, in 1993, we were invited to serve in Haifa. And as I was appointed as a member of the International Teaching Center, there was a fair amount of travel involved. And that was for 20 years. So I was able to travel back into those same countries for another 20 years. So that means from 93 to 2013, I was actually following the progress in some of these countries quite closely for over 4 decades. And the counselors of those countries naturally were and remain some of my best buddies and closest friends. And even now, I can't stand it, and so I just pick up the phone and I try and call and do a Skype and find out what's going on and how everybody is. And of course, this is 3 generations of people later. So all the people that were young, the way we were young when we went, they now all have children and grandchildren, and the entire situation of the faith has changed so much. So I remember one conversation. I wanted to share with you these conversations that I had with a couple of these counselors. One was a man named Tiati Azok from Cameroon. I don't know if any of you know Tiati, but just a wonderful individual with whom we served on committees and things when we were in Cameroon. And then how can you ever know what the future is? But then he was a counselor and we were in Haifa. And I remember discussing with Tiati after he was appointed a counselor and had been serving for quite a while. He said, Joni, we know what kind of countries we live in. We know, of course, that we're surrounded by corruption, by tribalism, by tremendous problems. If we don't pull ourselves up by the bootstraps, that was his term, however, we're not going anywhere. No one is going to rescue us. But as Baha'is, we can clearly see that this is the way out of the problem. And then he would explain, that's why we have to get this institute process going. That's why we have to pay such attention to the characters of our children and have this transformation. And then another similar conversation I had with another very close friend of 40, 50 years, Clément Fézouret, who is still the counselor of the Central African Republic. And he had the same kind of thing, but even with more detail and clarity. He said, we can't count on our government. It's a failed state. We don't count on the clergy. And then he said there's a lot of illegitimate babies running around the quartier, and there's a lot of problems with the young people, and we're not counting. We know we can't count on that. We can't count on our tribal system anymore. The old people are left in the villages. The young people have gone into the capital city. The old people can't read. What could we possibly do with this sort of old-fashioned sort of thing? It's not the view of the future. And then he said, and the NGOs, some come that are good. He said, but some come and they take your money and they run away. They say they're going to build a well, but they don't. It's very difficult to have confidence in these different things. So he said, it's up to us. We know. We have to serve the faith with all our heart and all our soul to the best of our ability. There is no other choice. It's all about the covenant. And you remember, what was that video that showed 4 different clusters 5 years ago? Frontiers of Learning. Do you remember the guy from DRC who said, we keep our messages from the House of Justice in our back pocket? This is a reality, because this is life. This is their life. This is everything. So you begin to get the picture of why people absolutely cling to the faith, give it their all. They are convinced spiritually, and they don't have a lot of distractions the way we do. The only movie theater in Bangui was blown up. And so that was the end of that one. I used to take my kiddies there, to see a Walt Disney or something every once in a while. Then they blew that one up too. So I mean, it's a completely different scene. We're living in the United States. We have so many things that we could do and so many distractions, and truly the materialism is really a little bit rough. You have to watch on yourself all the time that you're not going to fall into that one. So you see that different societies have different challenges. We don't have revolution and all the rest of that over there in New Hampshire, but we have other things, you know. So every part of the world is doing their best. But these poor and lowly, they did get this inestimable privilege. And if you look today, look at the houses of worship, where they are being built. This is a very interesting thing. You know, these two national houses of worship, where are they going up? Question. Papua New Guinea and? DRC, exactly. All right, now, if you look at the United Nations list of countries with which to do business, these guys are at the bottom. There's no confidence, no honesty, trustworthiness. I mean, it's not advised at all. And so, yet these are the places where the Friends have taken the faith so much to heart that they have built up extraordinary things over the last 30, 40 years. I'll be talking more about this on, I think it's Wednesday, with some examples. And these local houses of worship, that's harder to name those 5, I think. But we know one is about to be inaugurated. What do we say? To be commemorated? Dedicated, thank you. So that one is coming up, I think, on the 1st of September. It's right away, and we've seen the pictures. So we know that also the Cambodians, I was there when we had those 41 conferences, remember, back in 2008? That was one of the ones I went to. Oh my gracious, they're the ones that have suffered all that terrible stuff there, with all the killings and all that war. I tell you, the whole population looked as if it was 30 and under. There just weren't any grandmothers around, and yet the way they had taken the faith and begun to rebuild everything they could was just extremely moving few days when I was there. Colombia, India, Kenya, and Vanuatu. So for me, I'm interpreting these and thinking that these really are the places where we have the meek of the earth. We have the last shall be first for those of us who come from a Christian background. And I think one other example I wanted to give of the progress that has showed how these meek and lowly who were given this job is international conventions. Now, some of you who have been to international conventions over a series of years, I mean, that was one of my privileges. I was in Haifa right there watching them, and then before, when we were in Africa, we went to some of them. Wow, in the beginning, you know, I can remember back in the 70s and 80s, the delegates that would stand up and really speak at the international conventions were very much the ones who had the most experience at that time. And so you would have different ones from Europe, of course, the UK, which was also so respected, and France, the United States, Canada. Then places like Brazil began to speak up, and then South Africa began to speak up. But over the years, the last one I attended just before we left the Holy Land, it was extraordinary. The people line up behind the microphones, just so anxious to talk about the growth of the faith and the progress in their countries. But really, over 50% of them were in all kinds of robes and hats and, different delegates from these other areas of the world where such capacity had been raised up and such devotion to the faith after these 30, 40, 50 years was now evident. I'm thinking that this really is one of the wonderful things that we can be telling people at the time of the bicentenaries, because this is living proof. We have now living proof. We didn't have it when I was a youth. But now you can even watch the videos, you can see the things, and you can read the stories, and I'm going to tell some of those stories on Wednesday, about what is happening as we watch the rest of the world. It's simmering along and bubbling. Most people haven't the foggiest idea. And even the Baha'is, I think, we don't know enough about those wonderful things that are going on. So I think in conclusion, I can say that we're seeing unfolding on a world scene what first happened in the time of Manusher Khan in Iran, when the faith began to spread among the poor and lowly, or whoever it was, of Iran at that time. So here we are now, 171 years after the first story of Manusher Khan. And we are united at a world level by one common faith. And we have a similar educational process that is going on in how many languages throughout the world. We are speaking one language because of that similarity of this process. And we're all working to the next step, which we understand is community building and how to become solid at the local level, because we've decentralized to such an extent that we're now focusing on neighborhoods. You all heard Natalia Mann and the wonderful explanations last evening. Imagine the focus to be at that neighborhood level at this time, after what we've been through so rapidly in the last 50 years, with first people going to certain countries. So I think we have a great deal to be thankful for, and particularly those of us who've lived this particular series of decades, because the change has been extraordinary. In October of 2017, how are we going to show our thanks? How are we going to prepare ourselves in order to do a good enough job? I think, as the House of Justice has said in its most recent Rizwan message, and what could be more fitting to offer the Blessed Beauty on the 200th anniversary of his birth than the earnest striving of his loved ones to extend the reach of his faith. Right? That's us, teaching. May we each be worthy of the privilege of being alive and active as Baha'is at this particular historic point in time, capable of teaching and extending the reach of his faith. Thank you very much.